Hello everyone, welcome all to the second interactive series. Thank you for the response with the first topic. Today we are looking into the second session here. We are going to look into the topic emotionality versus rationality or reasoning. What helps balancing a healthy emotional relationship? So here we are looking at it from two perspectives, emotions as well as reasoning. So first we'll talk a little bit on the scientific background in a very simplified way about emotions, and then we'll also look about a little bit on the reasoning part, and then we'll move on as to how the relationships can be balanced, and then finally the practical implications of these emotions as well as the reasoning aspect. So looking at emotions per se, emotional experience from the time we get up in the morning till we go to bed. There are a lot of interactions that we have with people, emotional experiences, which will bring in a lot of emotional kind of experiences in us. Joy, happiness, sadness, worries, past, present, future, all kinds of feelings that we experience through in our daily life. So looking at a very simple example to bring in how these emotions are connected in our daily life and how the thought process happens as well as how it is reflected in our behaviors. So let us say that as an youngster looking for an admission in a prestigious college or in a dream college that you have worked very hard for. Let us say that the admission letter has finally reached your hand, and as you look at the admission letter, some amount of anxiety creeps in. So whether admission is denied or admission is given, so some amount of anxiety. Once you open the admission letter and you see that the admission is being confirmed, so a joy comes into the picture, another emotion, and then where you read the message that the admission is confirmed, and then your thought process of finally able to achieve what you were dreaming for or worked very hard for a couple of years, whatever that the struggle or hard work or that you have put in. So there is a thought process of being achieved or being accepted as one of the student of a prestigious college or something like that, and then a behavior of jumping with joy, running all over the place, and then trying to share with everyone, family members, friends, and trying to call them. So there's an amount of excitement and behavior that makes you run all over the place. So a single incident of these kind of things can bring in a lot of emotions. So emotions are something that color our lives, and there are varied emotions, both positive and negative. We'll look into the details of them a little later. So let us look at how these emotions, what are the major, from the psychological perspective, what are the major functions or the role of these emotions? Here, mainly emotions help us as a preparation of, as an action or a behavior. Okay, let us say that you are crossing the road, and then as you are crossing the road, you observe that a speedy vehicle is approaching. So immediately the fear that comes into your mind, and then you will jump back, a behavior, and then a feel of relief, a sign of relief that you could manage to save yourself. So, it's like it helps you to prepare a kind of fight or flight kind of action, which is a basic survival mechanism inbuilt in most of these, humans, most of the humans, even most of the evolved animals as well. So here, a kind of preparedness or an action or a behavior to be safe or protect oneself from the harm. So emotions help us. Fear, even though it's a negative emotion, here it has helped you to some extent to come back to a safety zone, or helping you to behave by moving back or making quick moves towards a safety kind of place. And emotions also play a very important role in prediction of future behaviors. So a lot of kind of preparedness towards a future behavior, like let us say that some amount of investment that you put in, like hard work that you put in, like the example that I have given you in the previous in the beginning of the introduction, where you have been working very hard towards a particular admission or towards a particular academic course, where you are kind of dreaming about how happy it would be that you get into this dream institute that you have been wanting to, and then want to build your future, and then a lot of all these efforts that are put in, which helps you to prepare towards a future kind of behavior, and then which will help you to kind of plan ahead, and then plan your day, how you have to go about, and then prioritize your time that is available, all these kind of stuff. So the most important aspect of today's topic is emotions, how these emotions are important in interpersonal relationships, be it a formal kind of relationships, a colleague relating to a colleague, or acquaintance, or close intimate relationships and family relationships. So basically the emotions, the connectivity that is maintained within the family between members, and then which helps them to maintain that kind of connectedness, and then helps them to work together in coordination in their daily life, not only in their daily life, as a kind of a system, which we will go into more details as we move on with this episode. So mainly as a important function of an emotion, mainly to kind of color your emotions, both sad as well as negative as well as positive emotions. So what are these negative and positive emotions? So basically, if you look at negative emotions, emotions like feeling sad or disgust, or feeling angry or anxious, and depressed, all these kinds of emotions. Fear, for that matter, is also a negative emotion. And looking at the positive emotions, usually the joy, excitement, surprise, looking for acceptance and anticipation, all these are the positive kind of emotions. So life is not just a kind of either negative or positive. We experience both the emotions, and both positive and negative emotions play an important role to some extent in our lives, especially when it is connecting to the relationships. So having looked at a little bit on the emotional aspect, what happens when you are experiencing through an emotion, be it a positive or a negative emotion? There are certain biological or physiological or bodily changes that are accompanied when you are going through an emotional experience. Let us say that a particular situation where you are, you are afraid of dogs, let us say, and then you kind of had some bad experience in the past of chasing by a dog or bitten by a dog, and then a kind of fear that is inbuilt, that helps you to be a little more watchful and be a little away from the dogs. So a kind of safety that is also there with the fear, and let us say that you get angry with certain kind of situations, and you are trying to be a little cautious around certain situations that might make you irritable or easily provoking. So some amount of safety, some amount of precaution comes here when it comes to negative emotions. And then the positive emotions, of course, we all want to be happy. We all want to, have that kind of, calmness, quietness, and happiness, joy, all these emotions. But life doesn't come like that. It has a mix of both pain and pleasure, positive as well as negative emotions. So this is very briefly about the emotions, the functions of emotions. And then what we are trying to look at here is, emotion is a feeling that helps us to, figure out these sensations, both bodily, and then it will guide our behavior. Okay, let us say that there is something like, you're upset about something, and then you have cried. Because you have cried, which is a kind of bodily kind of being tearful and watering from the eyes, and then you understand that you're feeling sad, so you cried. So when you're angry also, you experience that your heartbeat has increased, and then there is a trembling kind of, body trembling, where you understand that something is not going well, and then whether it's anxious or anger or irritability, that these kind of physiological changes that happen will help us to understand what kind of emotion that one is going through. So the important aspect is emotions are universal, irrespective of what kind of culture, where you are on this earth. So emotions are something that one can easily recognize, irrespective of their language, irrespective of their facial, whatever the region that they belong. One can easily recognize through facial expressions, which are universal: happiness or sadness or feeling fearful and all that. So looking at now the next aspect of reasoning or logic. Scientifically, when you look at reasoning or logic, it is basically a kind of two-sided approach that one takes: deductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning is something where you hold certain beliefs or certain assumptions, and then based on these assumptions, you kind of come to some understanding as to this. You derive some conclusions, or you kind of try to make some decisions. So looking at a very simplified example, so if you hold a general impression, a general kind of impression or an assumption or per se a belief that black color is inauspicious. Okay, it is a general belief that, if let us say hypothetically, or for example, you are holding for illustration purpose, and then you kind of you're supposed to attend some marriage function or something like that, a situation, and then if you see someone wearing a kind of black dress, and then you kind of look at it as something not appropriate to the occasion. So what we are trying to do here is that a belief of black being inauspicious make us draw a conclusion that it is something inauspicious. So someone wearing a black dress is considered to be something like a kind of a bad omen, or something not going well. So a kind of deductive reasoning. From general assumptions, you are arriving at some specific kind of conclusion. The other kind of reasoning is inductive reasoning. In inductive reasoning, you are looking at a kind of a kind of specific particular kind of example, and then you are making general conclusions here. So let us say that something like a cat is a black cat. Let us say that there is a black cat. And then if you are going out for some important work, supposed to be, something very important and significant for you, and then unfortunately you see a black cat coming in your way, and then you kind of, hold a feeling, whether is it a kind of, a generalized feeling, unease or something like that, where you are thinking that maybe the whatever the work that you are trying to move out may not happen, kind of a feeling. So here you're picking up some general some specific example of seeing a black cat and coming to a general conclusion that the work may not become successful. So these are the general, scientifically we look at them from a scientific perspective. What happens in a relationship, neither this or neither that. Even though they may be playing a kind of some amount of role, which we will look at a little later, but the kind of reasoning what happens in relationships is more circular. It is not a linear kind of causality or relationship in the, that we are looking at here. This leads to this, or because of this it has happened like that. So trying to hold a linear kind of relationship will not help either. Drawing a conclusion from a kind of general assumption to something specific like we have described, or holding a kind of particular specific situation and then trying to generalize. Either way, it may not be of much use when it comes to intimate, close relationships. What majorly works here is the circular causality. We call it circular reasoning. So I'll try to explain this in a more simplified way. Let us say that there is an alcoholic spouse, and then who says that because my spouse nags, I am feeling so depressed, so I am taking more and more, consuming more and more alcohol, while the other spouse say that because you are abusing and then you are drunken, I had to nag. So how do you kind of arrive at a point? Where is the beginning? Where do you see the starting point? Because it's a chain of events which keeps happening. So it is more a circular kind of reasoning rather than a linear kind of cause and effect kind of reasoning that happens in these relationships. To make it a little more understandable, I'll try to bring in another example where, let us say that a parent being strict or disciplining or giving a punishment to a child who is cranky or who is naughty, and then by showing some aggression, and then the child naughtiness will be halted for a while, and then temporarily it helps father or mother being a little bit strict or punishing the child might temporarily hold the child for a while, not showing that behavior, unacceptable behavior or whatever, and then again the child might start the same behavior, because it may be giving some amount of reward to the child, possibly that only when the child is naughty the parent is attending more. Otherwise, the parent is not really kind of giving attention to the child or spending time with the child, which can happen. These are some of the situations that clinically we come across. So I hope I tried my best to bring in how this circularity of chain of events leading, it's more like one part of one family member is being disturbed with an emotion of anger, or an emotion is being disturbing the whole family. So vice versa, the same thing with the happy relations or happy emotions as well. Someone happy with some particular kind of experience might spread it to the whole. So this is something where the circular reasoning is something which is more at work with the relationships. So now, trying to combine the emotions and the reasoning, what happens in the relationships? What is the best approach that one can take, especially when it comes to relational strain or relational issues? Is it the emotional approach, or is it the logical approach that will help, especially when it comes to close, intimate relationships like couple relationships, where while emotions bind the couple or emotions bind the family members, at the same time there are practical problems that are coming, that are becoming that need to be taken some amount of reasoning, some amount of practical approach. So before we move on to the practical tips or practical techniques, how we can maintain a healthy balance, I want you to introduce a little bit on a kind of flow chart. I'm really not doing a flow chart, but I can simplify it through explanation. So first we'll try to look at it from the body-mind angle. Body-mind interdependence. When we say body, the physical body, and the mind, we are mainly here from a psychological perspective, looking at it as a behavior. So how they are interdependent, what I'm trying to explain here is their interdependence. Let us say that we have someone has a headache, something to do with the body, and then how it affects the mind or the behavior. The person will become irritable and then unable to concentrate. If it is a student or someone trying to focus on some important discussion, the concentration will be difficult. Vice versa, let us say that someone is sad or someone is upset about something, which is again something to do with the mind, experienced in the mind, and then it will disturb the body in terms of unable to sleep, or sometimes people might oversleep when they are upset or when they are sad. Both the extremes, not the balanced way. And the same thing with the hunger, the basic biological functions, sleep and hunger. There can be either extremes, either oversleeping or not sleeping, either overeating or not hungry. So this is so far as body-mind interdependence goes on. The same relation happens even with our thinking and reasoning as well as our emotions. Now try to look at this carefully. The way that I have explained, I'll try to explain how the thinking as well as emotions are also connected. So again, in emotions, we have two partitions here, positive and negative emotions. Like I said, positive emotions like joy or appreciation or acceptance, these kind of happiness, these kind of emotions, and negative emotions like fear, anger, anxiety, sadness, kind of emotions. So let us say one is going through positive emotions. Invariably, the thinking also will be much more positive. It's more constructive, more hopeful, and then the person is much more at their best, in their functional level. And the opposite happens when one is going through a negative emotion, feel more pessimistic, more hopeless, and it's more like a destructive kind of planning or destructive kind of behavior that can happen. So thinking to some extent is considered as private. It's not as openly understood as an emotion. Usually the thinking is much more private. So when it is expressed in the behavior, person who is going through a positive emotion and then experiencing more a constructive and hopeful and then optimistic kind of thought process usually are more open to experience, or they are more willing to kind of take the challenges, problem solve, take the issues, and then try their best, and then giving their best is something that is reflected in their behavior. Similarly, when it comes to negative emotions and the negative thought process of being hopeless, pessimistic, and then more on the destructive kind of thinking process, here the behavior is more reflected in terms of postponing the situation or trying to avoid or escape, these kind of behaviors which temporarily help them to kind of hide their feelings, so that they are able to protect their face from these negative kind of feelings. So I think some amount of clarity has come in how emotions and thinking and behavior are interconnected, similar way as how our mind and body are interdependent. So looking at now the practical implications, or how what kind of approach, it can help in emotional relationships or close, intimate family relationships. So I will put it in terms of certain rules so that they are much more, practically useful for the listeners and viewers. So the first and foremost important point that I want to bring in is relations are reciprocal. Relations are reciprocal in terms of generally when it comes to adult relationships like couple relationships, usually emotionally as well as psychologically, when it comes to choosing the couple, we have discussed in those kind of videos where they usually get attracted or choose people who are having similar kind of emotional needs and similar kind of psychological needs, and there is a kind of reciprocal relationship that happens. So it is a two-way process. It's not something that only some person is behaving this way while the other person is not. So it is more like the clapping sound happens with both the hands, not with single hand. So there is a reciprocal kind of relationship. So it is not one person who is either the villain or either the the good person or the bad person. So both persons have to take in a kind of two-person relationships. Both the persons have their own contribution. So that is the first part of the understanding, or the rule number one. The second rule is about the triangulation. So sometimes, which is very, very well experienced in the family relationships also, let us say that both the parents or both the spouses or wife and husband are having a kind of little bit strain in their relationships, and one of the parent chooses to share that kind of hurt or whatever the negative feelings with the child. So bringing in a third person, a triangle, bringing in a third person could be a child or any other family member in between, in order to avoid the hurt or in order to avoid the pain of resolving between the spouses, where it might actually complicate the situation, even though it appears that temporarily some amount of relief has come in by the entry of this third person into the emotional aspect. But in the long run, there is only more stagnation and more strain built over a period of time. So until the spouse understand what is causing the strain and try to resolve their issues. Here again, the child will be the more into victim and more confused, and in fact a lot of child problems at a very young age are because of the parental discord issues or sharing this kind of information with the kids who are unable to handle or who are more confused, and then they show it more in terms of behavioral problems. So that is about triangulation. And then the important aspect is quick resolutions. It's important that whenever you have a kind of tiff, or whenever there are problems in the relationships, it's important that how quickly that you solve the problem is more important, whether you kind of take an emotional step or you take a practical step. So here, some important point that I want to mention is when it comes to relational issues, there are some people who are more tuned towards taking an emotional approach. We call it emotion-focused resolutions. They are more in their decisions or in their approach, they are more from the emotional aspect. Whereas some people, culturally also, if you look at women, it's more acceptable that women being more emotional, and their way of problem solving with different issues is much more emotional, from the emotional perspective rather than logical, whereas men are expected to be more from a practical aspect or from a logical aspect. Let us say that the wife is trying to express some hurt or something that she went through some of the other family members, and then husband looking at it more like, oh, there is a problem and I need to solve the problem. So the approach that they try to look at, or culturally how the minds are tuned, that women are more emotional and men are more logical. We'll look at it a little later again towards the end, how much of this approach can actually help them to balance their relationships. So coming back to this solving quickly, whether you take an emotion-focused approach or whether you take a practical approach, solving the problems, resolutions, bringing in resolutions in the relational strain at a quick way without jamming them is very important aspect here. So because the systems or the relations are never at rest, so they keep changing, and then if you try to change too fast and try to kind of take too quick kind of things might go like out of control, or if you don't take any decision, and then if there is a kind of stagnation also, there can be a block in the communication. And here the communication, the point that I want to highlight here is the communication that is very important in resolving the relationships. The communication per se is a topic in itself. We'll see whether we can cover it up in our future interaction series. But the communication, open communication of what they are going through, whether emotionally or from a practical thinking perspective, is a very important aspect, be it a positive or a negative kind of situation. So solving problems quickly without jamming up is an important aspect in working out a balanced relationship. And then interdependency, the important point here one has to understand is that these days when we are looking at the couples, too much of independent kind of functioning, that is also adding up to the family stress in the present scenario. Too much of independent functioning, interdependence is the factor where, let us say that one spouse is an extrovert and then able to manage the social relationships outside the family, while one spouse is more good at organizing or doing things with a lot of observation or less talkative. So it is more like it's not who is doing how much is not the point. The point is, as a couple together or as a family together, are we able to handle all the functions that are required for a healthy family functioning? So interdependence is a major principle that guides the family relationships, while being too independent, where the families are, looking at it as a vulnerability. If I am dependent on my spouse or I am dependent on my parent, maybe they will try to, manipulate, or they will try to hurt me. So these kind of, mechanisms, or these kind of relational kind of issues that we come across in the family therapy sessions. So interdependence is a more practical approach which will help them be together, bind together. That is one aspect. And the other aspect is empathy, your ability to understand the emotional feeling, be it happiness or pain or hurt, pleasant or unpleasant, positive or negative. The empathizing, able to feel, understand the feeling exactly the other person is going through, help you to kind of smoothen your relationships and help reduce the hurt a lot. Your ability to empathize is one important aspect in handling the relationships, especially when there is a hurt or when there is a pain. Even though you kind of disagree on certain things, but able to see the other person suffering or being vulnerable, and your ability to extend your support or extend your understanding plays a very major important emotion. Empathizing with the feelings of the other person, it not necessarily restrict only to the family relations. Even outside, when you feel that it is kind of able to empathy, when you see a hungry person, so immediately you want to try to give something, some food or some money, or in order to help the other person, where you are trying to extend your kindness, or trying to be a little more empathetic. It always brings in a kind of a positive feeling and makes you feel good about a kind of good emotional, positive emotional experience. So the same thing works in relationships as well, more from the interdependence perspective, able to empathize, able to be kind to each other, able to kind of give in and accommodate and compromise. All these aspects are very important, play a very important role in resolving the issues. And then looking at changing. So it is most of the times it's very easy to look at trying to look at the how the other person will change. So the most easiest thing is change yourself. When you are changing yourself, automatically the system is alerted, and then there can be change in the other side. When you are changing, you are putting the first step, and then it actually makes the other person also try to make changes. It's ultimately not who has done the first move. It is about ultimately how the relationship has come to a balance. That's more important in the relationships. So changing oneself rather than trying to change the other person is one important approach that will help you to understand, or move on and maintain good, healthy emotional relationships. Looking at some of the other aspects. So when some solution is not working, let us say that you have attempted a solution when there is a problem in your relationship with your family member or a spouse. Repeatedly, when you are trying to do that and then it is not working, trying to attempt the same solution again does not going to help. So you have to take a different approach here. When something is not working and trying to do the same thing is fruitless, sometimes you may have to take the opposite approach. Okay, let us say that like someone is trying to distance from you, moving away from you. and then you are kind of trying to hold a viewpoint that I have to pursue it, and then somehow I have to, make it up. While as you are trying to pursue and try to run behind more and more, the distancer might try to run till further. So it doesn't work like that. And then at some point, maybe as a pursuer, you have to stop and then try to make some other opposite move, where you must have kind of tried to find another solution in the way, while the person who is trying to distance will invariably has to look back and then see from what the person is running away from, and then maybe some amount of solution or some kind of solution will crop in there. Sometimes the opposite works better than trying to resolve the issues in the same way, and then especially when they are not working. So that is one thing that can help you. And then it is always the person who is trying to make the new resolution, a continuation of the previous one. When you are not pursuing anymore and you are trying to make some other change in the relationship, the solution that you have not tried before, and you are trying to attempt that solution, and then automatically there is some amount of resistance that comes into picture. No change is accepted immediately in a system, especially in a close family relationship, because they kind of expect the usual behavior. They come to have some inferences. So this is how you try to do in the past, so you might also do the same. So when you are trying to attempt a new solution, there can be a resistance coming up. So it is important that you kind of try to persist until the solution comes in. But sometimes if the solution is not coming in, maybe that particular approach may not be the right approach. Maybe you will have to try some other solution. So a kind of trial and error is approach need to be taken. And the other aspect is the person who is suffering in the relationship has to take the first move. So after all, the relation in a relationship, when you are the suffering person and you have the resources, limited resources, and you don't want these resources to be exhausted, be it pulling the relationship to the end, or in terms of resources, be pulling the relation until it kind of strains too much, or trying to take extreme steps. Use the suffering as a motivation towards trying to come out of the motivation, because the person who is the other end may not be going through the pain. So there is a low motivation for the other person to change because there is no pain. So it is the suffering person who has to make the first move, the first change, using it as a positive motivator, so that the relationship moves on in a much more practical way. Again, I said, who makes the first step in a relationship makes no difference. Ultimately, how the relationship is sailed through makes all the difference. So this is one thing that I would want to highlight here. And the influence of the family that you have grown up. So the family of origin, I have mentioned it in many of my family related videos, where sometimes the approach or the role that you have played in your family of origin, where you have grown up in your own family as one of the child with your siblings and parents, if you are using the same kind of interdependence also happens in your own family, in the spouse relationship as well. So if you are trying to use the same mechanisms here, sometimes they might be backfiring. So it's important that you need to correct if you have a strained relation with your father, and then you are seeing your spouse also having a similar kind of tendencies, and then trying to invariably transfer those kind of negative feelings onto the spouse, or vice versa, seeing mother being less affectionate, and then you are trying to kind of connect that to your spouse, that your wife is not trying to take care of whatever XYZ, and then you look at it, all women are like this. So these kind of inferences can only strain the relationship further. So it's important, when the baggage is coming from your family of origin, one need to also relook at and then work out with the people you have the strain, rather than let it creep into the relationships and trying and making the relationship more and more strained. So here again, not the last but not the least, but very important point here is many of us do this, which is a very common kind of approach that people take. Here again, whatever that I have gone through in my life, especially when it comes to hurt, pain, and suffering, I don't want my children. So I will give them a kind of whatever that I lack in, I will provide them, be it material or affection or whatever, the psychological or social need. So you have grown up in a different kind of family environment, and it is your baggage. So it has no connection. Your kids have no connection to that baggage, and then they are growing up in a different kind of life setting or different kind of environment. So they make no sense. So try not to get into that kind of, approach where what you lack in, try to, flood your children with what you lack in, and then try to make up. So it doesn't really help in that way, because there is no psychological value attached from your child perspective. It is more coming from your own psychological past. So it doesn't really help the children to grow in that way. So these are some of the aspects. So finally, when it comes to a conclusion point, before we start up with the question answer sessions, so the conclusion that I'm trying to make is that the emotional as well as the practical approach both play a very important role. So while emotions will color up our lives and then help them to connect by empathizing and understanding and making compromises, while a practical or reasonable approach will help. Both are important. Both are like the coins, the two sides of a coin. So both are important for balancing relationship. So this is what I wanted to share in today's session, and now we will open the session for question and answers. So here is the question coming in as to how to decide what approach, is it the emotionality or the rationality, that will help in resolving a particular problem in the relationship. So here, as I said during the session, that it depends again on if it is related to an adult to adult relationship, where you hold an emotional connection with the other person, where there is a problem coming in, and then you have to always look at the intention of the person with whom you are related. What kind of, when the person is giving a kind of difference of opinion, what is the intention behind telling that? Let us say that when we take a hypothetical example, like say there is a difference of opinion cropping up with regard to decision regarding to the kind of place that you want to go for a short trip. So in this case, if you are preferring one place while your spouse is having that they have to go to some other place, then there is a little bit of friction cropping up here. You have to take, like I said, it is ultimately not the emotional approach alone that is going to help in resolving a problem, neither only the rational approach. It is the balance of both. So here again, if the intention, you have some idea about the nature of the person, and then what kind of preferences or what kind of interest that the other person has, and then looking at the intention, you can take a decision or try to kind of look at the practical issues at the same time, the resources available. Either going to one trip can be more economical compared to the other trip from a material perspective, or distance wise, or the number of days. So you can actually make it a kind of discussion and then come to a common conclusion. Here more approach is more like trying to compromise on certain things and then trying to make changes in certain if you are planning to go on a flying flight, or and then the cost is more, then you can cut down. So you can bring in some amount of balance while you openly communicate with each other and then try to understand more from a emotional perspective, that you hold a emotional connection, the intention that the other person holds, and at the same time based on your resources available. A similar question comes from Surya here, where how parents can balance between emotions and rationality towards disciplining their children, like how either to be affectionate or to focus on the discipline. It is not an all or none, since children are very are completely dependent on parents for the kind of environment that they provide. It again depends on the kind of situation that we are coming across. Let us say that it is a social situation and then the child is being a little cranky and not cooperative, and then or if it is like a shopping complex where the child is more throwing a tantrum, that they want a particular toy and then you are not very keen on buying that. In such situation, based on the age of the child, it is important to reason. The reasoning is very important here. If the child is very young, you can actually try to convince the child whether if you behave now in this particular period that you are cooperative and listening to me, on the next occasion we will buy the toy, or or try to fix up a goal like the birthday you will get this toy as a gift, or some such way of trying to bring in some balance here. And yes, we all want to please our children and then want to give the best to our children, but at the same time discipline is also very important, and controlling the impulsive kind of behavior. These are the examples that you need to take in order to bring the control. Like the child impulse control is very important. In the long run, it is more important that the child should not think that whatever I ask will invariably I will get it kind of approach, and then they might lose the value of what you are trying to give them. So it is important that some amount of control be brought in at an younger age. But when it comes to an adolescent kind of child, that this same approach cannot be of much use. So here, with the adolescent, you have to take a kind of different approach, try to be more friendly, because an adolescent only looks at from their point of view as being the right thing, and then they can't take the other person's point of view, while a young child can be convinced. So here with an adolescent, the approach is more to do with trying to understand. Yes, I understand. Let us say that a kind of dress that the young teenage girl, your daughter want to select, and then you feel a little bit uncomfortable about her selecting that kind of a dress or outfit, then you might kind of go with their approach. Okay, you can buy this, but then I will have objection in where you want to kind of wear this. So I am okay if you are wearing at home and then in comfortable family environment, while I will have an objection if you are wearing it outside. So some such understanding is more important at an adolescent level, more from a equal. Looking at your child, adolescent child, as more friendly rather than looking at her more from a child perspective. So since there are not much questions coming up, now we'll also look at some of the possible questions. Like, let us say if someone is taking only rational approach, or someone is trying to take only an emotional approach, how does that help? Does that help in balancing the relationship? So either extremes, whether it is too much of emotions, always trying to kind of go with what you feel, going with that, might become always doing only an emotional or impulsive kind of thing, can also become little difficult. Let us say that if the person, one of the family member is little anxious or by nature easily tensed kind of a person, and then they try to usually be a little more rigid in their approach, as to only things has to happen only in this particular way, and some amount of rigidity might come into place. Here again, it's difficult with the person at that point of time, trying to reason with the person, or trying to bring in some such coaxing the person, or trying to make the person understand the situation, because that anxiety, being a negative emotion, will not let them be open to the reasoning or be open to the other side approach. So here again, it will be a little more difficult situation to handle. So too much of going into only emotional approach can become a little disastrous. Equally, in the rational aspect also, with no emotions and without understanding the intention of your family member, or without trying to empathize with the viewpoint, or the kind of trying to connect with the person, trying to only take always practical approach, can become a little more colorless as well. So again, the balance comes into whatever the situation may be. There is an emotional side, there is a practical side, there is a rational side. A balance comes in here, especially when it comes to two adult close relationships. Some amount of compromising, some amount of accommodation. So one time I will go with this, and one time I will go with your understanding. So some amount of accommodation is more important here. So looking at one last possible question, like what if the other person is not responding? How do we handle the relationship? Either they are neither they are responding to the emotional approach, nor they are responding to the rational approach. In this kind of scenario, like I brought in one of the in the resolutions towards the end of the topic, where I have explained you that where uh, if the person is like if the person is not responding, like a distancer. In case of a distancer, either you are taking an emotional approach or you're taking a practical approach. If the other person is completely distancing and not at all involving into the relationship, or not trying to connect or understanding in the relationship, and remain uh, try to be aloof or try to be away, in such case, the other person who is trying to pursue and somehow involve this person by using emotions or by using reasoning or practical approach, either way, if it is not working, sometimes it is better to stop this kind of approach, and then try to stop this pursuing business, and then take the opposite side, where trying to kind of move on with that, or try to figure out your own way of resolution. Ultimately, where the distancer might try to look back as to why the pursuer is not pursuing, and then what is different. So some such approach will help them to figure out or bring you out of this stagnation or the distance between the relationship, and ultimately some solution will crop up in the process. So like I said, to conclude, it is not who is the winner or who is the loser, or what works or what doesn't work. It is ultimately the balance that comes in the relationship is more important. Who takes the first step or who takes the next step is not important, but it is ultimately how the relationship turns out to be is more important here. Thank you all. We'll meet again with one another interesting episode. Thank you so much for your presence and cooperation. Thank you all.